Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. So we're into September, and for a lot of people the season's starting to draw close, but I'm going to just tell you, don't draw it to a close just yet. There's still things that you can plant, and there's things you can still be doing to improve your soil for next year. So perfect size plant pot. Garden's always a wonder. You're always finding things that you can use. You don't need a greenhouse for this, but it's just easier in here because I've got all my potting set up. The first thing on my list are going to be onions. Now, there's a couple of types of onions that you can sow at this time, and one is going to be that you can harvest this year and one for next year. Let's get on with filling my pot with some potting compost. I've chosen a decent sized pot because what I want is for the plants to stay in here, and I'm going to get my harvest from this very pot. So with this, you don't need a massive growing space either. And the ones that I'm going to be growing are spring onions. Spring onions in autumn sounds a bit odd, doesn't it? But because spring onions are a really fast growing plant, you can get a crop for them within about 2 months, 2.5 months. So hopefully if we have a decent September and we get a late frost, we should have spring onions to be able to harvest from here. And this variety of spring onion is called Ishikura. It's a Japanese type spring onion, but we'll get a harvest from here this year. Now, you don't need a greenhouse for this. You can do this perfectly well outside or just on a windowsill and a container garden. I'm going to just grow it in here, and it's going to be perfectly fine in this pot all the way through to harvest. So hopefully by the end of October we should get a harvest of spring onions from that. Sticking on the subject of onions, this is another Japanese onion, and this is a sensu onion. I've managed to get my hold of some white Japanese onions, which is something that I'm looking forward to growing. So you can get yellow sensu, you can get white sensu, and I've managed to get some white sensu. I'm looking forward to these. So I'm going to plant them in the same way, but these are going to be separated out once they get to about this size. Now these are some that I sowed in August, and I'm going to separate those out and I'll put them into individual pots ready to plant out next year. So I'm going to go for the same thing. I'm going to plant in a really thick, heavy way, and then once they get into a decent size, something that I can handle, I'll prick them out and I'll plant them out into little pots, and then next spring we'll plant them into the garden and we'll be away. We'll have some nice early onions. Now, if you don't want to go for the Japanese varieties, Radar's a good variety that you can overwinter. Similar sort of concept, grow it like that and then plant it out early spring, and away you go, you'll get a nice early harvest. So the next seed on my list is a plant that I used to actually only grow as a cover crop. It was a plant that it's brilliant for fixing nitrogen. It's brilliant for improving soil because it produces a nice lot of biomass, but we've actually discovered that I like them, and now we grow them for eating. Broad beans are an absolutely perfect plant for overwintering, and these pot noodle pots are a great one to sow beans and legumes in because of the being nice and deep. These are seeds I've saved myself. You know, we're big into saving seeds at home, and just push them in just like that. If you compact the soil, it doesn't matter. If you'll notice the grade of compost that I'm using for the onions, because they're a small tiny seed, I went for a really fine grade of compost. Now this is a grade of compost that I'd usually use for potting up, and it's got much bigger, rougher pieces in here. The reason that I go for this rougher grade of compost when I'm planting these kind of plants is, firstly, the seed's a lot bigger, so you're not going to lose the seed. Secondly, this compost is designed to break down over time, so I leave it big deliberately in big pieces or rough pieces because I want it to feed the soil for a long time, or feed the plant for a long time. Something that's going to provide food immediately and something that's going to break down over time is perfect because it gives the plant a nice long feeding cycle. So that's what this is going to be, nice long feeding cycle, because these plants are going to stay in here for a good few months. They'll probably go a little bit dormant during winter when it's really cold, and then they'll perk up really early spring, and we'll plant these out depending on how we get on. Depending on the size that the plants put on. If they put on a good amount of size, we'll plant them out in October. And if they don't put on a good amount of size, we'll keep them sheltered and we'll plant them out in spring. So the gutters are out. You can guess what that means. You might think of this as a plant for spring, but this is perfect time for planting peas right now. You can overwinter hardy varieties such as Onward. They do perfectly fine. You can overwinter these in a greenhouse or outside. We're going to do two things. We're going to plant a handful in this gutter, and we're going to plant a handful into the greenhouse itself and let them grow in the greenhouse, and hopefully we'll get an early harvest next year. Now, a variety such as Onward is a really good hardy variety that you can sow now and you get an early harvest next year. And again, these are fine to sow outdoors in a gutter like this and then transplant when you're ready, which makes them nice and easy to grow. When you're planting things like peas, it's good to think about them as plants. Not only will they give you a harvest, but they're a great way of improving your soil. So this is my snake gourd plant, and it's given me lots of lovely snake gourds, mashallah. So we've got a nice good harvest from them, and we'll still get harvest from them for the next couple of months. But what I'm going to do now is, just close to where I've grown them, is I'm going to drop a couple of pea seeds in. And the reason that I'm doing this is, one is so I can get a harvest early, and the other reason is legumes are nitrogen fixing plants, so they'll improve the soil and they'll work on they'll give us a crop, but they'll work on building the soil for next year. So when I'm planting again next year, the soil's already improved by something that I can find useful, both in terms of giving a crop, giving lots of fodder for the compost pile, lots of biomass, and a nice nitrogen fixing crop. So I'm going to carry on planting these peas. You can see I've got lots of legumes in here already. Now where I've got legumes, I'm not going to bother planting more peas, but where I've got heavy feeding plants, that's where the peas are going to go, and then I can plant a heavy feeding plant in the spot that the peas were in next year. I've got a bare patch of soil over here, and we're not going to get a lot of things planted into here. My mulch is wearing a little bit thin, so I'm just going to give it a rough rake just to prepare the soil for planting. One of the worst things that you can do is leave soil bare. You want something growing in it, or you want something covering the soil. So that's what our aim is now, is to get something growing in here that's going to grow really fast, and it's going to establish itself within a short space of time. But it's going to be a plant that's going to keep growing into next year, and when it comes to late winter, early spring, we'll cut it down, we'll mulch it. The seed that I'm going for is a type of mustard, and it gets to about this height, so my waist height. So it's a quite big plant. So it'll sequester lots of carbon, and all that can be added back into the soil. So you can keep working your garden all through winter, improving soil. And hopefully it'll rain today. It's been raining a little bit. Hopefully it'll rain and all that can get a good water. If not, we'll get the hose on it just so we can get these plants off to a good start. But cover crops, they're a really important way of getting your garden off to a great start for next year. They're a really important way of protecting your soil, and they're a really good way of sequestering carbon. You're not going to sequester as much carbon as a massive tree, but you'll get something, and that something is better than nothing over winter. Get that mulch thinly spread over the top again. There we go. See, there's absolutely no reason to not be using mulch as well as cover crops. Use them together, and especially if you're using a carbon-rich mulch like wood chip. It's a great way of adding green matter. A couple of weeks ago, you saw me harvesting my potatoes from this side of the bed. Now I'm going to finish the rest of this bed off, and I'm going to harvest the rest of these potatoes. As soon as we pull the potatoes up, we're going to get planting straight into this. It's thick wood chip. Here's the bed that I've had the potatoes growing in. It looks quite rough and quite big because what normally happens whenever you get any kind of material is the big stuff settled on top and the smaller stuff settled underneath. Once that's had a mix, that's what it's going to look like. Really nice, small, broken down compost. It's just like adding a really nice level of compost to your soil. Now, we've got radishes already planted into here. Now, I'm going to harvest the rest of this bed. We're going to harvest and we're going to plant radishes, and we're going to plant turnips into here. So there's a brassica for you there, a turnip. Turnip's a great little plant that you can either leave in the soil to break down and add nutrients into your soil. Same with radishes. If you've got really heavy clay, plant radishes, leave them in, let them dig down into the soil. I mean, this is a perfect time to plant these plants because it's not too hot. As the day lengths get shorter, because these don't need massive amount of light, you know, they're going to be perfectly fine and they'll carry on growing. And in October, November, you're going to get a nice harvest of radishes and a nice harvest of turnips. Yeah, Asian greens are perfect for now. So pak choi, am soy, tat soy, these kind of plants. You know, I love wrapping these off. Yeah, I spit these out like a wrap. Yeah. So get your pak choi, am soy, tat soy, all of these planted right now. You know, if you've got a problem with slugs or you find that they're getting eaten when you plant them in the ground, plant them in a window box. You know, put a nice layer of compost in there and put your pak choi into there really thinly, and you'll get a nice harvest for a good amount of time. And you treat them as cut and come again, and you'll be able to pick from them all, you know, this winter and early next spring as well. I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen. There's still lots of things for you to be planting. Get planting. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe for regular updates. And if you want to support our channel, you could always become a Patreon. I'll see you on the next one. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.